Hi there, I'm Jim.
And I'm Claire.
Let's talk teaching. Welcome to Let's Talk Teaching, a podcast from the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology here at Illinois State University. I'm Jim G. Joining me today, Claire's back. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Jim.
Dr. Claire LaMonica, our director here at CTLT. And we're going to go on a little bit of a different journey today. We've been talking a lot about best practices in teaching and how to do this and how to do that. I think today, let's take a step back and let's talk about what helps inspire you as a teacher. Where do you go to kind of get some, to maybe refuel, to get some ideas? And so we're going to take our first of what may be many trips to Claire's bookshelf.
Claire's bookshelf. That's where all English majors go for inspiration.
I would imagine
to their
so.
Bookshelves.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's exactly true. And I think a lot of us who weren't necessarily English majors, but we all have our favorite collection of books. And again, it's not just something that's very prescriptive. You have an interesting selection of books here. What we're going to talk about 3 or 4 of them today. What do they all have in common?
If you were going to recommend 3 or 4 books that I should read about college teaching, what books would they be? And I have 3 that I always recommend, and then a 4th one that I think adds a little dimension to the first. So the first one is What the Best College Teachers Do by Ken Bain. The second one is The Courage to Teach by Parker Palmer. And the third one is Creating Significant Learning Experiences by L.D. Fink.
Okay.
And then I've sort of added for today What the Best College Students Do, which is another book by Ken Bain. And it gives another perspective, provides a nice dialogue with what the best college teachers do, as one might expect.
So we've talked a lot about Ken Bain so far in our young podcast here. When we were talking about the syllabus as a feast, I remember that metaphor, which I think is from What the Best College Teachers Do. How does that really speak to you? What resonates about that? Well,
it's the thing I like about it is that it is descriptive rather than prescriptive. So it's not a how to teach book. It's more of a, here's how a select group of very effective teachers teach. And we're going to look for similarities. So that's actually what he did. That was his methodology, was he and his researchers over a period of quite a number of years identified a group of best college teachers, and you can read about the methodology, how they define that, and then had them talk about their practice of teaching, and they looked for themes in what they said, and so you get a very richly descriptive presentation of effective teaching and what teachers do to create effective teaching.
And going back to what you said originally, what impressed me about this book in particular is that I went into it thinking it was, this is just kind of a veteran university teacher's opus, a treatise on everything. Here's everything I learned. And it really isn't. There was a method and there was research that was done into this. And so he really does paint a picture, but the materials he's using have been well researched, have been well sussed out,
vetted, and really looked at across a big body of work.
Yeah.
So when he talks about the promising syllabus, he has looked at dozens, maybe hundreds of syllabi created by this group of highly effective teachers, and looked for commonality. So it's so if you want to find out how to create a promising syllabus, What the Best College Teachers Do isn't really a good place to go, because he doesn't go into a lot of detail about what a promising syllabus might look like. He really talks in much more general terms. The book answers 6 or 7 questions. So things like, how do they prepare to teach? What do they know about how students learn?
How do they create a creative learning environment? Was
Right.
The chapter I
Yeah.
remembered.
How do they assess student learning? A lot of, just big questions like that. And then each chapter addresses that in these sort of broad terms gleaned from his interactions with all these teachers.
So again, it's not prescriptive. So it's not a lot of how to do this, how to do that. It's a good way, I think, to be inspired.
Yes.
A little bit.
Yeah. It's inspirational and it's aspirational.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. No, that's a good.
Yeah.
That's
The
a good
first
way to
time
put it.
I read it, he talks early on about the 4 questions that, when he's talking about how the best college teachers prepare to teach, he says, well, there are 4 basic questions that they ask themselves.
Right.
And I literally thought, oh, I wonder if I can think of them. And I closed the book. And I wrote down what I thought were 4 questions that I might ask myself as I were preparing to teach. And it turned out 3 of them were right.
Right.
So I gave myself a C.
Yeah. Okay.
And moved right on.
Yeah. And the fourth question was
The 4th question was, this is very embarrassing. The 4th question that he asks is, how will I evaluate my own teaching is sort of the shortcut question.
And that was another Ken Bain moment that we talked about in
Yeah.
a previous podcast when we were talking about midterm assessments of our
right.
teaching,
Yes.
as opposed to assessing our students' work. That is a tough one.
Yeah.
That is a tough one.
Well, I just, I'd done it. I just had never thought about it as a formal part of my pedagogy.
Moving on.
Yes, we should do
Across as we move along, move down the books. I might have to put some sound effects in or something. That's like walking along the polished oak floor of your
browsing
office.
the stacks.
Yeah, browsing the sticks. Moving on to I think the second one you had mentioned was the Parker Palmer book,
Yeah, the Parker Palmer
which
book.
has a great title.
The Courage to Teach. And I resisted this book.
Did you really?
Yes,
Yeah.
I did. It was recommended to me, and I thought, seriously,
Does
The
it sound a
Courage to
little?
Teach?
Does it sound a little too self-help?
Yeah, and yes,
Yeah.
it was, and actually, my response to the opening chapter was, yeah, kumbaya, I'm okay, you're okay, let's all teach.
Right,
I mean,
right.
I love this book. I love the premise, and I love his conception of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So Parker Palmer comes out of a Quaker tradition.
Okay.
And so he brings that tradition to bear on teaching. And a part of that tradition, and I'm not a Quaker, and I don't want to mischaracterize it, but my understanding is that Quakers examine things.
Yes.
It takes them decades to arrive at consensus around important topics that they're examining. And he conceives teaching as an examination of important topics. And so he, rather than talking about teacher-centered teaching or student-centered teaching, he talks about subject-centered teaching. And boy, that's where he got me. As soon as I saw that, I thought, wow, that's cool. And so teaching is a shared examination of a subject by a community of learners that includes the instructor. So the instructor really joins in this circle of learning. And I loved the way he talked about that. And I also loved the way he talked about why teaching requires courage. I also really like the notion of the fear that we all bring to the classroom.
Yeah.
And not just us as instructors, but our students as learners.
Right.
And he has this great story where he talks about the student from hell. And we've all had this student in our classroom. It's the kid who sits in the back of the room, arms crossed, body language shutting us out, eyes possibly rolled up in the back of the head, facial expression says, just try to teach me. I dare you.
Yeah, I dare you. Right, yeah.
He talks about his encounter with one such student and the things he subsequently learned about the student that explained that demeanor and that attitude didn't come from it didn't come from a sense of aggression or challenge. It came from the student's own sense of not belonging, and the student's fear. This was a first generation college student living at home with what was essentially an abusive parent who never missed a chance to tell the student, you're wasting your time, you don't belong there, they don't want people like you there, they don't want people like us there. And so, that was when you think about the courage that it took for that student just to come to class every day, but afraid that he might fail. And so, if he puts up this front, then the failure is not really his fault. I mean, it's
to an extent,
it's
yeah,
just
it's a very
really,
complex,
it's a very
yeah.
complex, it's a very, and it's much more psychology than I can do, but it's, there's that. And then there's the fear we bring in that we won't be able, somebody will ask us a question that we don't know the answer to, that we won't be able to reach that, the student from hell, all of those fears that we bring with us, and then how those fears interact to interfere with the teaching and learning process.
And I think our colleague, Julianne and I may sit down and actually do a podcast, because I know she's been talking a lot lately, working with instructors on the imposter syndrome.
Yes,
that we all go through at some point.
That
like,
we all
I really
have.
don't. I really shouldn't be here.
Yeah,
I'm really faking it, and they're going to find out any moment.
Somebody's going to know.
Someone's going to. Someone's just going to stand up and point a finger at you and yell "J'accuse," and then you're done.
You have no idea.
So the courage to teach, and again, I think that's why it's a great title. I
Yeah.
think it's a great title because it does have. Once you get past that sort of self-help thing.
I mean, you just have to get into the part where he's really talking about the implications for teaching.
Yeah, and doing the examining.
And it's wonderful.
And whatnot. So what's next on the bookshelf?
Well, the third book that I often recommend to people is Dee Fink's Creating Significant Learning Experiences. And it's a very different book from either Bain or Palmer. And the reason that it makes it into my, if you can only read 3 books, read these 3 list, is that it essentially operationalizes Bain. It is very prescriptive, probably overly so. But interestingly, it offers basically a 12-step process for creating a course.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And who knew there would be 12 steps? And yet there are. And all the way from thinking about the context within which the course is being taught to designing the various assessments. So, and designing your course schedule for the semester. So it's very prescriptive, as I said, perhaps overly so, but it's a great process to go through once.
Okay.
And I think after you go through that process once, then you will find ways to make a process your own, or sort of to develop your own process, which might not involve all 12 steps, or maybe it will.
Or not all 12 steps all the time.
Not all 12 steps every time. Maybe not all 12 steps in order. I think I might approach things I think I do approach things in a slightly different order.
Right.
I also don't see it as a linear process, which it's laid out in a very linear fashion in the book. And I see it as a very reiterative process. So, I think, he talks about designing learning outcomes, learning goals, he calls them. And then, then deciding your assignments and so on and so forth. And what I have come to realize over 40 years of teaching. I can
bleep that out if you want. Yeah.
Is that I often start out with a pretty concrete idea of what it is that I want to accomplish during the semester. But then I'll sort of go along and I'll be thinking about the tasks that I want my students to complete. And if I try to match those up with the things I'm trying to accomplish, there's not always as high a correlation as I would like to see. And that becomes a sign to me that I either need to rethink the tasks or I need to rethink the outcomes. And sometimes it's that I've missed an important outcome. So
Right.
when I ask myself, why is it that I think it's so important that students engage in this task? Then I realize that there's something that I want them to learn. So, for example, this happens all the time with writing. People talk to me a lot about student writing and how to support student writers. And they'll say, but I don't really want to, I don't spend a lot of time on it. I don't have a lot of time to talk about this. And so I ask them, is this an outcome for your course? Is improved writing an intended outcome for your course? And if it is, then it deserves some time. And if it's not, it probably doesn't deserve so much time, but maybe it also doesn't deserve as much weight. So, you have to kind of balance all these, all these things out. So, I really like Fink. I like the process. Okay. I really like his taxonomy of learning goals. He has a very nice taxonomy of learning goals. Not Bloomish, but Finkish.
Okay.
So, which is a different thing, but it allows you to think about things that you don't always think about when you're looking at Bloom, which is purely cognitive.
Yes.
And he combines that with some of the affective domains. So, caring, the human dimension and the caring dimension and the learning to learn dimension, which is cognitive, but something a little bit different. So it's all kind of wrapped up in one taxonomy. Very nice. I like it a lot.
So for someone who's been teaching the same course for a long time, would this be a good gateway to re-examining that course, or is it more about course design?
Well, it's about course design, but I think it might be an interesting way to reconsider a course. And I sometimes have people do that. I use this as the basis for the Design Your Course workshop for early career faculty.
Oh, okay.
But frequently they are essentially redesigning courses.
Because they've inherited a course.
They've inherited a course,
as part
and
of their new position,
they need
right.
to sort of rethink their
Right.
way through that course.
Yeah.
So it's a nice way to do that.
And we should mention you've used the Palmer book and the Ken Bain book for various other workshops or teaching learning communities that we have here at CTLT, and I know some of our colleagues have as well. So.
Yes.
So
they pop up in a lot of ways.
They do, and we talk about them a lot, and we will continue to talk about them a lot here on our podcast. I guess what the best college students do is a good way to wrap this up, because it is kind of the fourth book of our three.
Yes, that's a good description. It's the fourth book of three.
It's the fourth book of three. It approaches the idea of being a teacher differently, because you're kind of following.
Because it's through students' eyes.
It's through students' eyes, and he uses their stories to kind of challenge some of the preconceived notions with which we approach teaching.
Right. Yeah. So what the best college students do is written with an audience of college students in mind,
right.
or students approaching college.
Yeah.
And I actually recommend this one as a high school graduation present.
Right.
I think it would be a great high school graduation present. Whether you can get your 21st century high school graduate to read it without being required to do so is another question.
I don't know if there's an audiobook version of it or something like that.
I don't know if there's. There might well be,
Yeah.
but I asked Ken Bain the last time he was here. I said, seriously, are high school graduates, are high school students, college students going to read this book? And he said, well, they are reading it. Mm-hmm. He said there are colleges that are using this book as the foundation of a freshman seminar, or even as the foundation of a course for students who are at risk for not succeeding in the university. And he said, they're reading. They really are reading it, and they really are getting things out of it.
And he approaches this from a very it's a very experiential sort of perspective.
It's really an argument for a liberal education.
It is.
And that's what's at the core of the book. It's an argument for a liberal education, and it's a guide to making the most of a liberal education. So why is it that we have these sort of foundational subjects that we make everybody study? You come to college and you're going to take these core subjects. You're going to take some math. You're going to take some science. You're going to take some social sciences. You're going to take some English. You're going to take some communication. And it takes that and it shows how that can be seamlessly interwoven with the courses in your major, no matter what that is, to lead you down a pathway to success, because you are coming at whatever you decide, whatever questions you approach in your life, you're coming at them with a prepared mind. And so that notion of a well-prepared mind, and what that does to help us be curious, to help us be creative, is really something that I've been interested in a long time. And I think that a student who reads this and only takes that away is taking away the most important thing.
So one final question. In what order would you read these?
Oh, wow. Well, I suppose that's a really interesting question, and I hadn't thought about it. But, I think Parker Palmer provides a philosophical base.
Okay.
And then What the Best College Teachers Do provides a descriptive approach to thinking about teaching.
Okay.
And then maybe, D. Fink provides a how to.
Yeah, how do you actually do it?
How are you gonna do this? How are you gonna operationalize it?
Yeah.
And then coming back to what the best college students do, and sort of looking back and might help you sort of pull all of that together. So read them that way.
Claire, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. This was a great idea. I love this. Let's do this one again.
We will. So that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Let's Talk Teaching. You can find out more about the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology on our website. That's ctlt.illinoisstate.edu. Until next time, for all of us here at the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology, I'm Jim G. Thanks for listening.